Mike Wallace, and this is Biography. Our story, the Duke of Windsor. He was born to become king of the British Empire. So said English law, English tradition, the English people. Yet the Duke of Windsor defied them all. Like a hero in some impossibly romantic operetta, he shattered the plan, renounced his claim to empire, and went into virtual exile with the woman he loved. The press called it the love story of the century. For 11 months, the crown of England was worn by Edward VIII, known now as the Duke of Windsor. As king, he was a figurehead who appeared in the proper costume at the proper time. His life was formal, impersonal, protected. Even in crowds, he was a lonely king, surrounded by a wall of ritual and protocol. Tradition had ruled his days not only as a king and young prince, but even as a child. At the age of 6, his full name is Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David. David's playmates are a prince and a princess, his brother and sister. Their days are spent with tutors and servants, and they get only brief glimpses of their mother and father. They are isolated, kept apart from the changing world at the turn of the century. At this time, their great-grandmother, Victoria, is Queen of England. Her reign is the longest in English history, and she puts the stamp of her firm personality on the Victorian age. But her son, who is David's grandfather, is another kind of human being. When Victoria dies, he becomes King Edward VII. This man, who has been called the Playboy Prince, now 60 and in the twilight of a life that's been a long party, ascends the throne of England. To his grandson, David, he's a smiling Santa Claus. David remembers him as the last Englishman to have an uninterruptedly good time. Edward's reign is brief, only 9 years. It ends in 1910. His grandson marches in his funeral procession. David is just one step from the throne. David's father, George V, is now King of England. He's a rigid, precise man, and both he and his wife, Queen Mary, are steeped in the traditions of monarchy. She conscientiously teaches her son, David, the lessons of royal manners and dedication to the crown he must someday wear. In 1911, at the age of 17, at Caernarfon Castle, David takes part in a significant ceremony. It is his investiture and marks his formal debut as royalty. He is accorded the traditional title given the future king. His father crowns him Prince of Wales. For the next few years, he patiently participates in a long round of official duties. When World War I erupts, David wants to fight, but he is forced to be a spectator by royal edict. The front lines are out of bounds to a prince who will someday be king. His father keeps him busy with inconsequential duties. Occasionally, he comes close to the front, but always far from real danger. David can only observe from a distance, and he complains, "Oh, to be fighting and not sitting back here doing so little compared to those who are giving their lives. Oh, not to be a prince." November 11th, 1918, the armistice. The war to end all wars is over. David must now take the traditional tour aboard a Royal Navy cruiser, required education for a prince. He visits every British possession, and many countries in between to see and be seen. His role is that of goodwill ambassador. He must impress the crown subjects and be impressed by the size and power of the empire. He has a shy, appealing warmth. He's a popular prince. He attends a rodeo, gets a chance to let down the bars, to break away momentarily from his role as official visitor. When he visits the United States, his first stop is the Whitehouse for a brief talk with President Wilson. During the war, he met many American soldiers, and he feels a special kinship for the Yank doughboys. He makes it a special point to stop and chat with them. Britain's popular prince is popular in America, too, which has always had a soft spot in its heart for royalty. He calls his New York City welcome a masterpiece of acclamation, thrilling beyond description. His days are planned to the minute with typical American efficiency. A brief ceremony, a speech, then on to the next stop. At West Point, the superintendent of cadets, General Douglas MacArthur, is his host. And then still more touring, more receptions, more meetings. He is the victim of his own popularity. There is so much handshaking that he eventually sprains his wrist. Women vastly outnumber the men lining his route of march. Wherever he goes, the greeting is warm and friendly. The legend of Prince Charming is taking form. This girl danced with the prince and could hardly wait to talk about it.
But he's so perfectly natural. Why, just seemed like dancing with anybody else, and he talked and didn't talk about anything particular and a little bit of everything, and it was just loads of fun, that's all. The Prince of Wales, a good dancer. Oh, I should say he is a good dancer. He's a perfectly wonderful dancer. I was so thrilled.
But an official world tour has few real pleasures. The prince compares it to being caught in a revolving door. He calls himself a wayfarer, never getting to know any place well. He is spending the better part of 7 years touring the empire and the world. Back home in the British Isles, still more official appearances. He's 30 years old, a bachelor. He doesn't have to worry about a family or making a living. David craves adventure and excitement to break the monotony of royal life. He spends a great deal of time racing thoroughbred horses. His tumbles frighten the royal family and raise old-fashioned eyebrows. But the Prince of Wales is Prince Charming, and most people grant him his fun. One day, his duties take him to an air show. Daredevil pilots of the 20s unleash a display of tricks and speed and courage. The prince is first amused and then fascinated. If racing horses is thrilling, think what flying must be like. His decision to take flying lessons and risk his neck horrifies the royal family. But to the English people, this Peck's bad boy quality makes him more likable, more human. He's the first royal prince to fly. His father, King George, is now aging. More and more, his son is called upon to fill in for the king at court functions. It is simply a matter of time before David will sit on the throne of England. As the world's most eligible bachelor, he is caught up in a whirl of social events. Weekend fox hunts are part of this life. And in the winter of 1931, while on a hunt, he meets an Englishman named Ernest Simpson and his American wife, Wallis. They become part of David's select circle of friends, and they join him on his round of nights spent in Mayfair, London's exclusive playground. Belvedere Castle is his private home and the center of his social activities. Ernest and Wallis Simpson are frequently among his weekend guests. Close friends become convinced the prince has more than a passing interest in the attractive Mrs. Simpson. She's a worldly and sophisticated woman. David is impressed by her charm and wit, and he's delighted by her frankness and independence. More and more, the two are seen together in public. She is by his side as he watches the races. She joins him in a vacation on the continent. She has quietly separated from her husband. As the months go by, there can be no doubt that David and Wallis are in love. King George V is dead, and as the empire pays tribute to his late father, David is aware that he is the next king. But how, he wonders, can the King of England carry on a romance with a married woman? And what if she were to be divorced? Would he be permitted to marry a divorcee, a commoner, an American? The great drama of his life is about to begin.
Edward, Albert, Christian, George, Andrew, Patrick, David is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful liege lord, Edward VIII. God save the king.
On January 20, 1936, David, Prince of Wales, takes the throne as King Edward VIII. Outwardly, he is calm, but his heart is heavy. He is involved in an impossible romance with a married woman. He must resolve this dilemma before his formal coronation as king just 9 months from now. Preparations for the event are already underway. It is part of a tradition dating back 1,000 years. Before the coronation, the perplexed king seeks escape and privacy on a cruise aboard the royal yacht. Wallis Simpson joins him. They make a momentous decision. No matter what, they will marry. On the waters of the Mediterranean, they try momentarily to forget that ahead of them looms a royal scandal. Wallis must begin divorce proceedings as soon as possible, and David must find some way for her to become his queen. David returns to England and resumes his duties of state. He must not betray his anxiety. His advisors have secretly hammered out a gentleman's agreement with the British press. For the moment, the newspapers will not mention the subject of the king and Wallis Simpson. But at most, this can only be a temporary measure. The issue must soon come to a head, his decision to marry Wallis Simpson must inevitably shake the empire. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin advances as the king's major antagonist, proclaiming, "The British people will not stand for this marriage." Winston Churchill will put his career in jeopardy by his outspoken defense of the king. The Archbishop of Canterbury will place the Church of England in the path of the marriage by declaring that the king seeks happiness in a manner inconsistent with Christian principles. David's brother Albert is next in line for the throne, but will take no part in the conflict. For Queen Mary, the question of this marriage poses the problem of choosing between royal tradition and the love of her son. By chance, a routine ceremony brings many of these figures together. But those watching cannot imagine the strange circumstances of this moment. With the king is Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, the man who insists the marriage will topple the government. But David has told him a way must be found. Time is running out. The secret cannot be kept from the public much longer. Wallis Simpson stays at Cumberland Terrace. She has already divorced her husband, and she agrees to a marriage in which she will forfeit her rights as queen. But Baldwin says it won't do. Shortly after, in Wales, the embattled king inspects the living conditions of the miners during a tour. The area is ravaged by a depression. David is distressed by the desperate situation of the miners there, and he reportedly comments, "Something must be done." The remark is taken as a slur on the ability of Prime Minister Baldwin's government. No statement could have hurt the king more. Now Baldwin is furious. He is determined to force the issue. The gentleman's agreement is broken. Headlines stun the nation. For the first time, the British people learn that their king wants to marry an American, Wallis Warfield Simpson, a commoner and a divorcee. Wallis's home is besieged by reporters. She becomes the center of attention for the British press. The pressures, the publicity become unbearable. In virtual panic, she flees England, and she takes refuge in a chateau on the Riviera, only to be discovered and hounded by a horde of reporters. She hides from their cameras and questions. All she can do now is wait. Baldwin goes to Buckingham Palace to hand the king an ultimatum. If he will not give up Wallis Simpson, he must risk the political consequences, the wrath of the government, or he must abdicate. The king's answer? "I will marry." At 10 Downing Street, Baldwin summons his ministers to plot a final stand. There can be no compromise with the king. The British people stand on the sidelines in suspense, waiting for the next move. It is no longer a private love affair, but a public issue.
If the king were to make a queen of someone who has been twice in a divorce case, undoubtedly there would be millions of people, both in England and in the Dominions, who would be greatly distressed at such a thing.
The Baldwin government has forced an issue which cannot possibly be decided until next April. In my opinion, it is a possible explanation that they are concerned with the growing popularity of the king by reason of his interest in the depressed areas in Great Britain, as compared with the failure of the government to deal with this difficult and vital problem.
To safeguard the family, our church must oppose the remarriage of divorced persons.
Mrs. Simpson has twice been in the divorce courts. To my mind, that completely rules her out as Queen of England.
I think he is a sign of modern democratic time.
After all, the king is a man like myself, but he should not allow his private life to interfere with his public life.
We hope that His Majesty will be willing to make a great personal sacrifice.
I do not think that the church should interfere in matters of state.
My opinion of the king, he should marry who he loves. He's been a good chap to the working class.
In my opinion, The king's marriage should be a private act and considered as such. In this case, we should be able to avoid a constitutional matter.
Feelings run high in Britain and throughout the world. Support mounts for the king. Public opinion swings toward the man who had always been a popular figure. H.L. Mencken flippantly calls it the greatest story since the resurrection. The nation is on the verge of political crisis. In this moment, an empire is caught up in the battle between two men, one motivated by political considerations, the other by love of a woman. And between them, a country is being torn apart. David must act immediately. The final decision is made behind palace walls. David tells his mother he will abdicate. At 4 p.m. on December 10th, 1936, Stanley Baldwin goes to Parliament to announce the abdication. David's brother, Albert, will become England's new king. It is over now. David is no longer Edward VIII. He is simply the Duke of Windsor. This is his last night in England, and he wants to explain to his people. He will make a radio broadcast. His former subjects and the world will hear his reason for the abdication.
A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as king and emperor. But you must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love. And now we all have a new king. I wish him and you, his people, happiness and prosperity with all my heart. God bless you all. God save the king.
The uncertainty, the anguish, the conflict are over. And in a villa in France, the newly married Duke and Duchess of Windsor pose for their wedding pictures. A king stepped down from his throne so that this event could take place. And 1,000 years of tradition were swept away so that a man could marry the woman he loved. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor spend the years of their marriage traveling to various parts of the world. They have homes in Europe and in the United States, and they divide most of their time between these two continents. Their life together seems to have a feeling of tranquility, and yet a sense of eternal movement. Their love story is complete. It's hard to imagine that these two figured in a romance that shook an empire. We see their picture now and then in magazines, well-groomed, aging, smiling at us rather sadly, almost as if to say, we didn't mean to cause such a commotion. It was, after all, a private matter.